presented something.
Well, that's why I can't come too often. Otherwise, like, you know, it becomes like super common, and then it's like, you know, like the Mario game. I don't know why I'm going to this, but like the mushroom, I want to be like the super rare NFT.
You gotta understand. You gotta understand the scarcity value. Look.
So where does that leave me, Teach? But anyway, back to the.
but that interesting you say NFT, because that's what I'm talking about in terms of representing these loans as sort of dynamic NFTs that we can stick into a vault, and we can actually track. You know, I think someone was asking one of the channels the other day, you know, can a maker DAO investor actually see, you know, the quality of what's in the vault? Well, you can then start putting things like that in there. And then you can start being selective about which real world asset loans you want to invest in.
I think sorry, go ahead, Teach.
I was just going to say, like, using an NFT, a sort of unique, immutable digital representation, to show the world some fact, I think is valuable. In this particular use case, I think the piece that's sort of missing is, like, you can use an NFT to convey information about a loan off chain, but you sort of need a ZK to anonymize that information, right? Because you can't have information from a borrower of HVB being on chain. If that NFT is on chain, it also has sort of limited liquidity in my view, because it's effectively a security, right? So it has to kind of be whitelisted. So I think, like, at a high level, the transparency of data on chain and the inability to doctor it is definitely valuable. But I think when dealing with real world counterparties, like, you're working with a system that already has its ways. It's almost like, you know, Maker lives in one consensus environment, and these real world assets, they live in another consensus environment. And the bridges are always kind of the weaknesses. But to me, there's not like a super elegant way of conveying off-chain assets on-chain through an NFT that sort of makes a proper dent. But maybe that's just my own misunderstanding.
I mean, the way we deal with it for Tin Lake is, like, I think you're right. There isn't an elegant way, right? I mean, basically what we ask the asset originators to do is to represent their asset with an NFT with the pertinent information, the risk classes and all that. We're replicating, I think, to a point where you're saying, TJ, but you're right. There is obviously all of this other sophisticated data that we right now are not going to be able to put on an NFT. But, you know, Tin Lake is now on Ethereum. Once we move to our own chain, hopefully that will be easier, right? To be able to put more data about an NFT on chain and then use that as collateral. I think we're solving for the problem, but slowly.
And I want to go one step further, and I want it's more than just information. I mean, because I think there's multiple aspects. What I'd like to do is to actually have the agreement on chain, and what I'd like to do is take existing loan agreements, take existing finance documents, and figure out how to reimagine how they would look in a digital format. And that's more than just a PDF. And, you know, and maybe there are aspects of the entire finance process, whether it's the onboarding of an asset, whether it's, you know, the terms, you know, like, for instance, one of the points we made today in the presentation is, you know, like, loan agreements are not homogenous. I wish they were. In some markets they are. Like, when I was in Hong Kong, leveraged finance basically used the Asia Pacific Loan Market Association form, and that was very standard. And you could do, you know, a $3 billion structured finance deal in a week and a half, because everybody knew what the document was, and everybody knew what you could negotiate and what you couldn't negotiate, and that was just the form that was used. And it'd be good if we could take that concept and somehow build a digital representation of some of those key terms, so that you could then kind of streamline to actually make Maker permissionless in a real world finance type of way. I mean, that's a long way, but I think centrifuge is starting at a point, and there's like multiple aspects of the finance stack that my dream is to be able to modify and digitize, whether it's in token format or something else. And David, I'm going to have to rely on you because I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to what can be in digital form or not. I'm just the finance guy.
But you can do it in phases, because we're going to need someone who's tokenizing these loans, and maybe that's a security agent, or whoever you define as doing that. And maybe initially we don't. I think TJ said about needing zero knowledge proofs. We can rely on the security agent to obfuscate, confidential stuff from loan agreements and put those on chain. Maybe on IPFS. And then the same applies to the NFTs. That security agent could track the identity of each of the loans, and we leave the identity off chain until we get the technology to do the zero knowledge proofs.
I mean, that makes sense to me. Ultimately, you still have that trusted counterparty, right? Who's conveying information that's supposed to be immutable.
It's going to happen with the real world asset at some point, right? You're trusting someone to bridge. I
agree.
You're trusting but verifying. You, as a lender, you can never really trust, right? you trust but verify.
I mean, I think these things will come. Again, maybe it's just sort of a lack of vision for me. What in this scenario is, so this, an agent who, observes collateral that's entering a trust, right? A bunch of loans. And then that agent effectively, issues a representation on chain, an NFT, which at that point can't be manipulated by anyone. What effectively is that getting you? What have you solved that you hadn't before?
Okay, so I would add some more things to that. The agent, when they get the monthly reports from the bank saying, the loan to value ratio of this particular loan is X, we can put that on chain and update it each month. And the agent can have that responsibility, and that's how you're bridging, to the digital world in terms of getting that information. Ultimately, you're going to have someone with zero knowledge proofs. You probably can automate a lot more of that, but it's going to take time to implement that technology.
Yeah.
So David, I'm going to have to circle back with you at some point just to pick your brain. I think I had mentioned this when I first met you last week, but I just think it's where I'd like to take it. And I think, what I said before Will decided to record this or started the recording was that, maybe in terms of leveraging Maker, right? Maybe Maker can say as part of its process, hey borrowers, happy that you want to use us because we're a cheap form of capital, but we want to use that leverage to kind of force change. We don't know what the change is going to look like, but we know where we want it to go as a community, and would the community kind of support that as a principle that borrowers should at least be thinking about? They're the ones that need to come up with the ideas, right? I mean, it's better that we can certainly come up with ideas, but ultimately, the more people we have thinking about it and attempting different things and coming up with different solutions for consideration, I think we're more likely to hit the success mark more often. Sorry, I've monopolized. Does anybody else have any other questions, comments, observations, complaints?
I've got a pretty good rant.
Congratulations.
I got a great rant, but I'll let, if there's anyone else who wants to say something, I definitely should. All right, rant it is. CP, you mentioned that something like a waterfall could fairly easily be executed via smart contract, right? So like a tranching function where someone gets paid first, someone gets paid second, assuming funds sat in that smart contract. That smart contract could slice them up and send them where they need to go. I think like the extension of that same logic is kind of what you were saying, right? How do we get not only the tranching function when the funds are there, but the very contract that explains the mechanism? How do we get that on chain, and how do we convert that into code itself? And so, I think about a week ago, Kianga made the point that, yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are sort of inelegant when you're dealing with off-chain entities, but what if you can create bonds or lending vehicles to on-chain entities with revenue, right? So imagine you have the ability for a DAO, let's just take Maker, for example. Well, that's a bad example. Let's take like a DEX, right? A DEX that has some revenue. It has a stream of income. That DEX issues a bond on chain, right? That bond basically says, this entity borrowing needs to pay out in stablecoins, let's say DAI, 4% to the senior holder, and all remaining cash flows to the junior, right? And what that bond does is it takes a security interest in the tokens of that protocol. It's literally those tokens are locked up in that bond mechanism. And as long as that DEX is covering its debt service, all is well. Those tokens are left alone. If they perform on that bond, those tokens are returned to the treasury of the borrower. But built into that loan, you can effectively have the entire funding mechanism and the tranching of cash flows all on chain without having to deal with the legal infrastructure whatsoever.
I would agree with that. I think where I struggle with how do you deal with things like so I agree with that, TJ. How do you deal with things like covenants, and maybe covenants can't be digitized per se because it's based on somebody's performance, but it just occurs to me that I've been talking to various people that are really focused on the Internet of Things and sensors and all this data and information. Well, it's just a question, can you rethink how the covenants work that get combined with accessible data that you as the lender are basically saying to the borrower, hey, I'd like you to digitize your performance, if you will, of this particular covenant. And I'm just trying to, I'm purely speculating, but it seems to me if we're going to really make it such that these contracts can become digital and as not self-automated, but as automated as possible, that's the kind of questions I think you need to ask.
I think you can. I mean, it's critical that the covenants be like, if you only have sort of the basic mechanisms of the bond and kind of the security interest in the tokens, but the covenants aren't automated, like you might as well not even do it, right? But I think you can, in fact, to your point, automate the covenants. Like if you think about a bond, right? What covenants do you want? They're pretty basic. You want a cash flow sweep in the case that your debt service coverage ratio falls below something. That's basically it. There's a few other ones, but that's the basic idea, right? You want to get out ahead of the problems. So with a lot of these DAOs, all of the financials, I mean, this is the beauty of DeFi, like go to something like Token Terminal, all of the earnings, all of the revenue, it's all public. Right. And so will this bond offering be. And so you have your numerator and denominator to figure out your debt service coverage ratio. And should, it fall below a certain point, as long as that borrower and the lender sign the transaction on chain that says we agree to these terms, if you breach that covenant, then those tokens get foreclosed on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think that has to be some sort of give and take, right? Like what's technically possible. And obviously, if anybody wants to start up this legal crypto startup, I'm happy to bring other investors to the table. But really, it's a matter of like, I think, for example, for us, TinLake can calculate some of the covenants, right, automatically. And then some of it is really up to us to then say, maybe the definition of hard and soft covenants will have to be a little different in this case, trying to figure out what can be hard, meaning you can see it on a blockchain, no one is going to argue about it, right? And then have a much smaller list, or maybe ideally zero, right, list of soft covenants that has to be reported off chain because technologically it's either impossible or very long, or takes very long to verify. but there has to be, I think, at the beginning, some sort of a give and take, right? You can't be like, we want these 10 things. And if we can't do it, then, it has to be, look, this 10 things, 5 of it can be calculated right now, 5 cannot. It's like that same problem that Christian, you brought up earlier, right? There are certain APIs that we can use to connect directly to bank accounts, but there is no bank that currently offers this, tokenization, right? So it's the journey to get there. I think that matters.
Or I don't know. Is it the tokenization, or is it just that because that's what you guys do, right? I mean, centrifuge in my mind is a smart contract, not centrifuge, but the Tin Lake protocol is in effect the paying agent with respect to DAI, right? Because Tin Lake only kicks in once everything in the real world has happened, and then DAI and dollars have been sent to the broker, converted into DAI, and then DAI goes into the Tin Lake protocol, and then the Tin Lake protocol says, I've got 10,000 DAI. Okay, now what am I supposed to do with it? Okay, let me check my software, and it runs. I know it's a lawyer's version of how Tin Lake works, but I mean that's what Tin Lake does, which is a paying agent. So then my question is, why can't banks? If you look at a project financing, there's a cash waterfall in every single project. The first dollar that ever gets produced to the last dollar that ever gets produced out of a project gets accounted for to the last penny and goes into a revenue account and then works its way through a waterfall. All that's just math, right? It's just, does the account have a balance, and is an amount payable? Yes or no? And then you move down the waterfall. People are doing that. I mean, there's the collateral agent or the bank that's looking at the budget, the dollars that have come in, and saying, okay, do I need to pay out or not? Or the borrower is doing it. To me, that's perfectly suited for the smart contract, because that's in effect what you're doing on Tin Lake. So you're doing it with crypto. My question is, there should be somebody doing it in fiat, because it's exactly the same concept. And I agree with you, Kianga. We need more entrepreneurs.
Janice, could you expand a little bit on what you meant by like no bank was tokenizing, or we would love to hear more about that. Also, hi everyone. My name is Brew. First time joining one of these calls, and my 2 co-founders are here as well, Ryan and Arman. But no, we were really interested in the Maker protocol and just in general. Like essentially being able to provide liquidity to real world assets, but then also use that as like collateral for stablecoins as a whole. So it's really cool to be here, and we're excited to just be joining in the conversation a lot more going forward.
See, Christian, you got your wish, more entrepreneurs.
Okay. I think it was Kianga's, but yes.
Everybody, yes. So one of the questions that the RWF coordinator has come to us with is, how do we sort of track the payment of monies, right? Like that, if an asset originator, let's say new server, took the DAI, how do we make sure that it's actually going to the end borrowers, right? So there is a way, we don't have it yet, we're working on it, but there are certain APIs that you can plug into the bank account to say, all of the monies that get converted from DAI to USDC and then to USD sits in this bank account. It is only allowed to go out to these 5 borrowers, right? And we should be able to track everything, right? So in our indenture trust work with Christian, some of the roles and responsibilities of what the trustee does, what the payment agent does, what a verification agent does, we're hoping to not replace it, but if it's direct APIs and we know exactly how much funds is going to who at what time and all of the data that comes with it, then maybe the verification agent's job is to look at that specific transaction and be like, yep, that happened at that point, we're good, and so on. So that's what I meant by having the APIs. And so I guess my point is that there isn't a perfect way to do that yet, beyond APIs.
And I think you could even do things like conditions preceding to funding. I mean, you raised, Janice, the question of trustees looking at things. I mean, let's be honest, CPs to funding are pretty simple. I mean, somebody shows up with a certificate or a bunch of certificates or hundreds of certificates, as the case may be, depending on the size of the financing, the complexity. And all of that should be, it's just paper processing. That's all it is. I mean, I spent a career as a lawyer processing paper. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a paper pusher, as sometimes I tell my kids. You know, that's what I do as a lawyer. I push paper, particularly as a transactional lawyer. I've never been in court before. I just push paper. That should be, you should be able to automate some of those processes. I mean, does the legal opinion say what it's supposed to say? Okay, well, seems to me that's a natural language, a natural language processing function that you should be able to say, okay, you know, you receive the opinion and, you know, I don't need to read it. Have the computer read it. I thought that's what computers were for. And, you know, it just seems to me some of those functionalities should be there, and we should really try to be encouraging people that are coming to Maker to begin thinking about that, because otherwise we're just superimposing Maker onto existing payment rails or existing financing rails, and we're not actually innovating. And to your point, Kyanga, in the chat, I mean, I think that as Maker, we have, if it is true that we have a low cost of capital, and if it is true that we're attractive for borrowers, well, we should try to, you know, have that change be one of our goals. It seems to me. I mean, obviously it's not my decision to make, but that seems to be something that we should push borrowers to think about, because unless we push them, they're never going to do it.
I agree with that. I also think in the context of centrifuge, yeah, like we're obsessed with what payment flows are, that everything ties out. But I think the piece that's more important is ultimately not that the die gets to borrowers, but you know, like the servicing information on the individual loans, and seeing real time if borrowers are in fact paying back into Tin Lake, so that we can, in advance of any potential deterioration, you know, see what's happening there. And I think sort of to I think his name is David, to his point about a sort of an off-chain agent putting information on chain and signing it. I think there's an intermediary step there for real world assets, because again, you're going from one consensus environment to another and you want them to sort of communicate. You could have the servicer, a savvy servicer, effectively sign a remittance report monthly on chain, which says, I, servicer, you know, with this reputation in the real world, verify that these borrowers paid this amount into the Tin Lake protocol. And that would kind of convey interesting information on chain, not only to Maker DAO, to real world finance token holders, but to anyone who is potentially, wants to buy a Maker governance token, which is de facto backed by these off-chain assets that are opaque.
I think KB +1, you should be involved in our calls with the potential trustees that we're interviewing, because it's really hard to get them to switch their mindset. But yeah, I think it's not. Yeah, I'm gonna start putting you on my calls.
That's their job, right? They're trustees. They're not paid to be creative. They're not paid to be creative.
So we are trying to get folks to be able to at least do a little bit of time, and we're with regards to sort of looking at what 6S says that they have gotten whispers to agree to. We're also trying to clarify that, because to us it seems that it's actually quite like what Christian alluded to, quite antithetical to what they are saying that they do or don't do. We have no red flags so far, but it's a bit of the like, how do we push you along and be able to look at blockchain transactions? But I think, TJ, I think you're right on the money for that one, a sort of savvy servicer thing.
Yeah, and I mean, also, like, a lot of the problems here is there's all these path dependencies, right? Things work a certain way. Servicers do certain things. They've done them forever. Like, why are they going to change without an incentive? Well, what if you said, look, servicer, we'd like you to sign on chain, set up MetaMask, do what you got to do, sign on chain the remittance report every month. And if that's the case, then, someone in the process, maybe it's Maker, or I don't know, maybe the borrower, will give you 5 extra bips, right? If Maker's cost of capital is truly, fixed at 0 in a rising rate environment, that is an element, that is a kicker we can throw in to incentivize a level of transparency. I mean, it's a lot of work, right? And you guys know this business more than I ever could, pontificating from a Peloton right now, but
that's why your video is off. Okay, that makes sense. Can I buy you one of those things that you can work and Peloton at the same time? The little tables.
Please, I would love it. I've only got a standing desk, but I haven't found a way to work in the Peloton yet. I got to fix that. So I'm under optimized.
I gotcha.
Tease, you're my hero, man. Here I sit at my desk.
You gotta choose better heroes.
Yeah, David actually has asked a pretty interesting question around the development around these entrepreneurs or teams that actually are coming up with solutions out there. So which is about has Maker actually considered a grants program to incentivize the development or integration of existing real-world asset tokenization systems. And David, to be honest with you, no, not directly. Like as from the Maker side, there hasn't been a dedicated effort to, I guess, to seed fund, I think, solutions that would come to the protocol. Saying that this is kind of more on the open source side of things. Some of these projects have come forward with solutions that are very very specific. So there's RWAs that actually came up with some solutions in the past. These the guys that actually came up with 10 lending solutions as well. But there wasn't like a specific, as far as I know, like a grants program that would say, we have an allocation of funds and we would like to solve problem X, Y, and Z. Can we have, an RFP process or whatever from a bunch of projects that would like to develop those solutions for us? And I believe that probably is where we would develop the best type of solution, because then you would have like almost like a little competition of grants between different projects, and the best one kind of that fits the highest breadth of requirement actually kind of wins and is integrated within the protocol. So that's an amazing actually proposition, and I think this is definitely something that we should discuss as part of the lending incubator, which is kind of like another initiative that I'm part of, and SES, which is essentially kind of like the incubator for all different types of projects, and they have like a allocation to grants as well for research. So yeah, there's at least 2 channels there for these kinds of initiatives.
So David, you started us off on a great topic today. Thank you.
I had a follow-up on the conversation of like tokenization of real-world assets. Something that like we've been thinking about is kind of like, what does an oracle for real-world assets look like? And I felt like it was touched on kind of earlier in this conversation too, on if you can bring certain types of information on chain, like but I was curious if anyone like came across any cool projects that were like kind of working on like what a real-world oracle could look like for maybe things that aren't as like predictable or like continuous.
What's an example of something that's non-predictable and non-continuous?
Well, so for instance, I think something like predictable could be like or like semi-predictable could be along the lines of like what Tunify and like Coral does, like recurring revenues, like somewhat predictable in the future, or rent for like a property is like somewhat predictable. And I think could maybe risk model in a certain way, but something that's like not as predictable as like if you wanted to, I don't know, for instance, like fine art or something like that, that's kind of like out there. It's like, could you have like a reasonable, yeah, I guess that's more like, we're just kind of thinking along those lines.
Best example for me, and again, because I'm coming from the space I know in terms of an asset class is energy, a wind farm. I mean, to me, energy production is the perfect thing for the Internet of Things, whether it's nuclear, whether it's hydro, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, gas, it doesn't matter. Wind is unpredictable. Solar is a lot more predictable, but wind is definitely unpredictable. I mean, you within a day or so what it might be, but and that type of data, I can assure you they're monitoring it anyway. I mean, they know exactly what they're producing because that's how they get paid, right? So the data is there, and to me that's something that is very predictable, and you should be able to see very quickly, to the point of what your covenants are. Is the wind, so the power plant's going to be subject to a certain number of operating covenants, and it needs to operate a certain number of hours a year. The lender's going to want to know, gee, is there a chance that I'm not going to get paid because, instead of performing at a capacity of 90% during the year, it's only operating at a capacity of 25% a year. And if it's at 25% a year, you're not, or a month, you're likely not to get repaid. Well, that data is there. And that should be something that is easily put onto blockchain and made available to the lender. And I think, in fact, project finance is in once, even though it tend to be complex, is actually, in my view, one of the areas that's probably the easiest, simply because the infrastructure is there, and it's your repayment is based on that infrastructure. So you need to know what's happening with the infrastructure, and that data is being kept and maintained. So it just needs to be tokenized or put on blockchain.
Yeah, Chris, interestingly enough, it is being done. There's a consensus spinoff I was chatting with Chris about, called All Infra, and they're embedding meters in wind farm projects, and actually getting that data on chain. It is a private chain, but they're using it to really establish carbon credit valuations.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, and then it's just rent payments. If you're doing real estate, I mean, I don't see why that can't be put on blockchain. I mean, again, I think it requires the bank to which the payments are going to be willing to, and to Tej's point, having zero knowledge proofs, the bank being willing to have an API that reflects that data. But data's out there as far as I know.
I think CP hit it right on the nail right on the head, with sort of IoT being a hive of IoT devices being able to convey like sort of binary data. What was there sufficient wind in this farm to make the lender comfortable or no? I think another two other examples maybe just get people thinking is there's a sort of an insurance protocol called Ether Risk, and it's targeting crop insurance, and it's a similar kind of dynamic, right? You want a hive of IoT devices serving as an oracle to convey weather data. An example would be for drought insurance. If there wasn't sufficient rain in an area, then that policy should parametrically pay out, right? Or another example is a protocol called Parcel on Solana. And what Parcel is effectively trying to do is create tradable derivatives of neighborhoods for people. So you don't have to own the underlying. They're just trying to create a synth effectively of Santa Monica or of Williamsburg. And the question of oracles there, I think, is fascinating. And I haven't looked under the hood, but an example of an oracle that I think would work there is if you could convince one of the big boys, and I don't know why they would want to do this, but like Airbnb or Zillow, to allow you to tap an API for sort of average nightly stay, right, on Airbnb, or average close on Zillow, or average rent on Zillow. You could sort of create a synthetic meter for the performance and success of specific neighborhoods. And so I think shit like that is absolutely fascinating, because it is incredibly difficult to foreclose on a property in meat space. It's messy. It's kind of betrothed to legal constructs and liquidation courts and all that good stuff. But if you could, create a representation of real assets and to tokenize them, right, to have an index of a neighborhood and allow people to collateralize that, I think that's potentially compelling. And then, of course, synthetics just broadly. If you have a decent oracle for something like, lithium or copper, is trying to, finance green bonds as MakerDAO, something we don't really know how to do, going to make more of a dent, or will a whole bunch of folks able to access synthetic lithium and synthetic copper and maybe like synthetic, wind power derivatives too, make more of a dent? I don't know.
So there were two other questions on one Kianga had raised. Kianga, I'll let you raise what you had suggested. I thought it was a really interesting
Oh
point.
yeah,
so I'm going to pass it over to you rather than read your comment.
Sure. Yeah, it was just your Brihu. Is that how I pronounce your name?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, just your question and discussion just reminded me of this idea I have about the future, where millions of people have really great jobs basically reporting into Oracle contracts, just sort of armies of folks who may have in the past worked at factories or any number of jobs, that there is a future in this digitized world for them, because we need real-time information that's extremely localized, right? And we'll have Internet of Things. And anyway, it's just a nice picture that you reminded me of, that human beings are still required in the future that we're building, and that not all people who need to have some PhD or be a what have you in order to participate. So I think that hopefully there's this nexus between the real world and all that we're talking about that's going to include a lot of people in that future.
And it makes me think, Kianga, of the I think the U.S. government just opened up the 1950 census. And the reason that they just opened it up is that I think it was the last time that U.S. Census workers actually kind of went house to house, knocking on doors and, writing down the names of, the husband, the wife, the children, the dog, where they lived. And it actually provided a very, very granular look at America in 1950, whereas I think after 1950, as I understand it, the Census Bureau has taken a more statistical based approach. So they didn't actually go out knocking on doors and interviewing people kind of family by family, but in some sense, I think that's what you're suggesting. I mean, and in some way, I guess that's what the I think that's what the U.S. Department of Agriculture does for crops as well. I know obviously farmers will say, okay, well, I've planted this much soy, this much wheat, what have you. But I think my understanding is USDA actually has people going out into the fields and actually looking and measuring,
Sure.
come May, how big is the corn, and that all gets kind of reported and aggregated. So I think it's the same concept. And if you think about the lack of information in large parts of the world, that concept could be really useful, because then you are gathering a whole bunch of information.
It's kind of ironic that like the trust but verify part could come right back to human beings at the end of the day, right? We have IoT devices and satellites and everything, and then we're like back to needing human beings all over the world to say, okay, but can you just go and look and make sure that sensor actually says what we think it says? Thanks so much. It's like pretty cool, potentially.
I like that you paint it with an optimistic sort of brush. I hope it kind of goes that way. It kind of like it reminds me the way you're describing sort of like a whole bunch of people like being freed from, you know, meticulous, or not meticulous is the wrong word, but sort of like boring, repetitive labor, and being able to like go and, you know, walk around and report on the weather. It's such like a nicer version of like, you know, people in the Philippines grinding like with their axes, you know. It's
Totally.
like it's a better wage than like in being in the coal mine, but it still kind of sucks. Like you're still just like tapping buttons on a computer. Like what if you could go like on a hike and like, you know, inform Aetherisk if it rained or not? That would be dope.
Yeah, like verify that all those walnut trees have been planted and are sequestering carbon, and, you know, reporting back.
Exactly.
Getting an NFT drop, you know, for doing that. Yeah.
Actually,
says T on his Peloton. He's not even walking outside.
that kind
He's
of
gonna do this meeting.
that kind of job that we are describing here, it's already existing, right? If you look into a lot of the work that is going on with image processing for AI, there is like the reason why probably a lot of the AI in China has been developing at a much faster rate than in the US is because there is armies of people actually validating that what the AI is seeing and processing kind of is what those humans I also do actually seeing. So it's not a completely out there actually idea to think that the same thing could happen with real world assets on NFTs. So absolutely.
I mean, Will, to your point, like every time we complete a CAPTCHA to verify that we're a human being, we're just training an algorithm.
Essentially, yeah. So.
Have you guys heard of Hive Mapper, where you basically you get tokens for putting a dash cam in front of your car, and you drive it around? Yeah, so basically an idea of that, right? But in a more, I don't know how to say this, in a more decentralized manner, where you instead of having people drive the dash cam around, you incentivize people to walk to the walnut tree farm, right?
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
It's the decentralized Patriot Act. I did almost get one of those though.
The dash cam?
Yeah, I mean, like I have a helium miner, you know, and it's like, I don't know, there's so many of them out there that the yield is kind of garbage. And I saw Hive Mapper and I was like, all right, the new Ponzi, let's do this one.
So Colin had asked whether Maker knows or has prioritized what. I'm only laughing, Colin, because the thought of Maker knowing, but prioritizing what problems that we'd want to solve. I mean, I think that's really, I think, part of where we started this, which is I don't think that there is, right? And where David and I initially got into this last week, and then had this discussion initially last week that I've not completely forgotten about, and then started again today, and is, you know, I think that is from a real world finance standpoint, that's kind of a discussion I think it'd be worth having in the community. Right now, well, up until recently, it's just been floating around in my head, and then I met David. Now it's floating around in both of our heads, and now we've had a conversation here, so it's getting a little more expanded. But I don't think that I've not seen in how to do that and what that priority would look like. But I think it merits certainly a consideration.
No, yeah, I mean, just more context from me is just kind of hearing the different parts of the conversation today between like the savvy servicer, right, and the idea of a bank that can kind of bring accountability off chain to that part of the framework. Then Will commenting on the two groups, one of which I think he's a part of, that kind of thinks about grants. Kianga, I think, pointed to like the DAI Foundation, right, is potentially handing out grants. I'm just wondering, as we think, and David's points about, you know, how do we hand out those grants? It would be like kind of looking at specific to real world assets or real world finances, what are the parts of the stack or the off-chain world that ultimately we want to try and bring more on-chain collectively all together to the benefit of Maker? How do we kind of look at that that process and then prioritize the XYZ problems as Will articulated. So I'm just curious where that's being led from, how that's being thought about, and if, to your point, Christian, if it needs to be brought out into the community and brought into public discourse, I am all in favor of and support of public discourse, but just wanted to ask the question and kind of bring it all together.
I think it should be, because ultimately, one, it is the maker community, but the thing that I like about Maker is just kind of the ecosystem mind, and just putting the challenge out there for people to think about. I mean, we can tease out a few potential considerations, but maybe there's somebody out there that's working on it. And I just don't have a clue, or none of us on this video have an idea, and just being able to reach out to that network and kind of get people's input, I think would allow us to then actually be able to try to affect meaningful change using our status as a DeFi lender. I mean, to Tej's point about encouraging or incentivizing a borrower with a little extra basis reduction, to me that's a perfect. That should be the best thing to do. You don't even need to do a grant. Just say, okay, we'll take a little off of your loan rate, which is already low, but because we want to see this happen.
I mean, that's a fine strategy. Everyone's coming to you guys for cheap cost of capital anyways. So to your point, if you load a little bit further, it just incentivizes them that much further. I think the thing I would say there though, right, like, is if it's brought to the community, like prioritizing the problems or prioritizing the process flow, like I feel like from a pain point perspective, no one knows that better than the RWF core unit, right? So when you just think about the considerations, as you put it softly, right? But I would convert that into like maybe the problems or the prioritization of said problems. Yeah, I think it's
no, that's fair. That's fair. And to be honest,
quite well placed.
I was going to say, I think it serves another purpose. So it will educate the community as to, the challenges we're facing. And so when they see an MIP up and, people being negative on it, you'll have an understanding of what Maker values, if that is Maker's approach.
Yeah, so maybe, Colin, what I've taken out of this, and David, you and I need to get together and anybody else, just to begin thinking about that, because I think you're right, Colin, that we need to identify what those issues are, and we're probably best placed to identify them. And it's just making it a priority amongst all the other priorities.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's only in your head. I actually don't think it's about like, what are the problems? It's like, do I have the time to sit down and actually put this into a post that I've got to put
exactly.
in front of the entire Maker community?
The bigger issue,
yeah.
But I'm trying to do that too. I posted yesterday the first in what's going to be a very irregular series on why real world finance is hard. Real world finance isn't hard, but it's hard with DeFi. And this could be one of those postings, and it's just, maybe it's Christian Peterson's musings, and I get no reads and no hearts, and I'll know how successful I've been. But at the end of the day, maybe that's a way just to throw out there to the community and just say, hey, look, here's some things, anybody, here's some things we're trying to solve. Anybody have some ideas, and how to do that?
Yeah, I think the idea of having almost like we need to kind of to build things in a way that also like can probably scale beyond, I guess, a number of brains, and we've got limited, I guess, processing capacity with just four brains in the team. And I know that we kind of like we got to see a lot of stuff, and that's a privilege. But actually, at the end of the day, taking actually those problems and transforming into priority, and then engaging people that are like focus on solving those issues is probably something that we need to focus on a more like decentralized. I don't know if that's the right word, but actually at least like open source ways of solving these kinds of problems, like with a proper open source ethos to it, where we kind of like say almost like having a little bit of like a labs that says, okay, we've got like all of these issues. Can we take all of these issues and put that like to labs of people that can kind of have a dedicated time just solving issues with us? And that could be like decentralized labs as well, or it can be like one lab that actually aggregates all of those problems. And I think right now there's a lot of interaction between us and electrical engineering services, and I think the guys have that mindset of willing to automate and to coordinate stuff. And like David, thanks for joining the call. This is my first interaction with you, and I think from all the discussions today here, you can see that you have definitely that mindset. I already knew that actually Robert had that mindset and the whole thing, but I think it's more like about trying to not solve every single problem within just the processing power of 3-4 guys, but kind of like these guys being like, we've got to see a lot of stuff. So here, all of these problems, let's kind of like try to prioritize what is it that needs to be fixed next in that list, and then work out with engineers that have that capacity as well to say, here's kind of like a financial problem. Sometimes it's hard to actually explain, but when you take that step by step, engineers are awesome at kind of like just understanding when you kind of take things step by step, and then say, now let's try to invent what this problem is and how we can actually either replicate it in an automated fashion, like just automation, or we can actually think about this problem with a completely different mindset, and then say to borrowers, hey borrowers, this is the way that we are proposing you to go forward with. But I don't know whether actually the real world finance, at least in its current form, would have the capacity to be both the problem identifier and the lab. Maybe in the future. Not tomorrow, probably. Go ahead.
Totally agree. Well, I mean, engineering resources are very limited, so we almost have to go in baby steps and prioritize. What can get done and what we outsource, right? But I think CES and yourselves can play a critical role, and maybe working with some of these outside parties, to the extent obviously the forum agrees, right?
Yeah, I've been talking a little bit with Ernst & Young, right? And they were talking about whether they could be testers. I don't think they want the liability of like doing the sort of like full risk assessment. But at least if we sort of agree on a framework, right, with them, then that's something that they could design. And any independent third party, if looking at the same set of data, would come to the same conclusions. I think that's something that we were talking about with them to see if that can be a process, not just for Maker, right, but for Centrifuge as well, as we do like our internal due diligences. So happy to like share as we learn more with them, but we're facing the same issue of trying to do more with a limited number of resources.
And I gotta say, like, not necessarily it's a 100 of people initiative. Sometimes actually kind of like small teams actually can be extremely effective at doing this kind of things. I mean, before joining Maker, I worked in the place that actually I most liked in my whole career, and I haven't still kind of found the same environment that to this day. Maker does bring a lot of that, but it's a different setup. I worked with this smart contract auditing firm, but actually it was not only smart contract auditing. We had a labs arm. Sorry for the kids. We had a lot. We had a labs arm within that team, and we developed back in 2017, 18 a lot of solutions that right now have become kind of common knowledge across DeFi. So we were working on a chain ops, which is essentially like DevOps for smart contracts. And we did so many great stuff in such short period of time. And the team was essentially composed of, 5 people. So it's just really, of course, we didn't have like the I guess the distance, the working remotely and all that kind of stuff that sometimes is a bit of a barrier when it comes to, especially for ideation and putting things into production. It was still local, but you don't necessarily need a huge team for things, but you need focus definitely for solving problems. So, anyways, my
So I think we're at the end of this week's office hours. But thank you for everybody who has participated, and thank you for a very forward-thinking and discussion, very creative discussion. It was really this is the type of thing that makes it, for me anyway, makes Maker very interesting. So thank you for your contributions and brainstorming. So Will, I'll let you turn off the video.
Thanks so much.
See you next week.
Bye, everyone.